When Laurie Lucid stumbled over the rigid body of Manny Perril lying in her darkened apartment, she shut her eyes and screeched like a peregrine falcon. Concerned, she touched her nose, feeling for a beak, then felt her forearms for feathers. Nothing. Then she opened her eyes. Manny's saxophone was lying at his feet, his lips still clutching the mouthpiece. Laurie looked closer. Traces of an onion bagel were clinging to the reed. Most women in her shoes, or even their own, wouldn't have noticed that. But Laurie did. Scanning toward her left, she saw Manny's wide-open sax case near the door, several dollar bills scattered within its velveteen interior. Her mind reeled. Had Perril been busking in the hallway? Had her neighbors in the posh 55th floor Manhattan condo been dropping cash into his sax case? But now he was dead. Maybe it was something he played. She recalled wanting to choke him more than once when he was mangling Misty. But let's get back to the body. After all, that's what American culture was all about on this hot day in July 2094. Violence, spectacle sports, and a fad involving dressing up your pet ferret in pink underwear. Looking back from 2540 AD, long after the intercession of the Grolnothians and the Great Transformation, it's easy to judge them, but wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's get back to Manny Perril. There he is, Laurie thought. She lit a Philly's cheroot and took a long drag on it, but her mind was unable to focus. Her synapses sautéed. What was she supposed to do without him? It seemed he'd always been a part of her life, guiding her, directing her, making choices for her. She tried to recall life without him and couldn't. Whatever. The body. She had to get rid of Perril. Suddenly, inches behind her willowy neck, a gently soothing whisper. "Is there any way I could be of service here, ma'am?" Laurie whirled around, then whirled again. And again, that crazy music in her head. West Side Story. Whirling about the apartment like a mad thing she was now, unbridled and free, her arms spread wide, doing little Latin pirouettes over Perril's body. But I have that effect on women, especially during insertion, the instant when I download myself from the future. So let me introduce myself. My name is Legion Ayers of the Trans-Temporal Corrections Agency. TCA's mission is preventing horrendous crimes throughout history, which is a tall order. And by tall order, I'm not talking about those mile-high McDonald's Macromax topped with ice cream and banana shards. They stopped selling those in 2465, when all 229,308 McDonald's restaurants worldwide were vaporized by order of the Grolnothians. No, I'm talking about really horrendous crimes like what happened to Perril, or World War II, Archduke Ferdinand's assassination, Justin Bieber's first record date. I could feel the hard Brooklyn streets closing in on me like the lips of a giant sea clam. I turned right at Central and drove past the YMCA. It's fun to live at the YMCA. I hear young men can do what they want there. But I'm not a young man. I'm 280 years old, so it might not be that much fun, even though I'm in pretty good shape. I do a lot of jogging, about 10 miles on foot and another 5 miles on my hands. It's not fun, but it's better than hitting yourself in the head with a hammer. I used to do that to toughen myself up. That was the first time they took me away, but that's another story, and not a pretty one. So there I was, cruising up Central, when a motorcycle pulls up alongside. Someone slaps a magnetic device onto my passenger side door, then speeds off with a roar. I knew I had to get out of the Beamer fast. I slammed on the brakes, shoved open the door, and rolled out onto the street. I kept rolling fast, rolling into the car in the next lane, luckily missed by his onrushing wheels, rolling all the way to the curb. That's when I heard the crash and raised my head to look. The big gasoline truck behind me had crunched into Laurie's car, crushing it like an aluminum BMW, like a car made from Pepsi cans. If there was such a thing, not a bad idea. You could market it on eBay and make a killing. But I knew more trouble was on its way, big trouble. So I leaped up and ran over to a guy on a BMW chopper. God, that company's doing well. Gave him an elbow in the face, jumped on and gunned the motor and got the hell out of there. In my rearview mirror, I saw the explosion. Cars flying everywhere, end over end, like in those $50 million action movies they had back in the 21st century. Wait, this was the 21st century, and I was in it. I had to catch up with that bomber on his motorcycle. I weaved left and right around the cars until there he was up ahead. "Hey, slow down," I shouted. "I can't catch up." But the guy ignored me and kept going. Luckily, my last assignment had been in the Old West, and I developed some skills there. I pulled out the lariat I keep in my backpack. I told you I had a backpack, right? No, don't leaf back through the book. The part about the backpack is probably gone. This book is written in ephemeral script from Ephematech, a 26th century firm, and the contents are constantly changing, morphing as you read it. Picture the primordial nothingness just before the Big Bang. What you're holding is a lot like that. Back to the lariat. I whipped it out and hurled it unerringly at the biker. It dropped over his head, and I pulled hard, jerking him off his... Yes, another BMW bike. I'd strongly recommend BMW at its current valuation and anticipate robust growth in earnings in the next quarter, except who knows what quarter you're in. Down he went on the pavement, and I flew past to drag him behind me for a few blocks to teach him a lesson, but I could see in my rearview mirror he had kept his feet and was actually running behind me, holding onto the rope. This was impossible. Now he was pulling back on my bike, slowing me down. Who was this guy? When he got me slowed way down, I jumped off the bike to face him, tying the rope to my bike handle. That was when he started whirling my motorcycle around in the air in big circles as oncoming traffic veered off or screeched to a stop. This was turning into a hell of an assignment. Ever feel nostalgic for the future? That was me. But I couldn't cut and run. There was too much at stake. Lori, Manny Perril, my BMW shares, and the Starbucks coffee shop behind me. That whirling bike was getting too close to the cappuccinos for my taste. That's when it hit me. I needed a cup of coffee right now. I turned and headed for the door. That's when it hit me. The bike, that is. He was good. He just grazed my temple with the front tire. And I went out like a light. New York City Police Detective Farrell O'Farrell was dog-tired. He was finishing up an 18-hour shift during which he'd had to race on foot from 41st Street to the Bowery to run down and pummel into submission a white trash meth dealer. Then he'd gotten into a bloody 45-minute firefight with a firefighter, had wild kinky sex with a Romanian hooker while trying to get the story on a Russian gangster boss, then used his rock climbing skills to scale the first 28 floors of the Empire State Building, to pluck a buck-naked hippie exhibitionist off a ledge and clamber back down with the guy in his back. What with all the running and screwing and hippie hoisting, well, he smelled awful. But now here was his police radio springing to life with a hated voice of Captain Quartz, his boss.
"Get off your butter, Farrell, you lazy Mick, and get over to 23rd and Central in Flatbush. We got a gasoline truck explosion and some street-fighting bikers in front of a Starbucks.
But I'm off duty in 10 minutes, sir.
And I'll be off the can in 30. Time and a half, O'Farrell. You can buy a lot of Guinness Stout with that."
Farrell bared his teeth at the cloudy Manhattan skies, fired up the engine of his cruiser, and headed toward the bridge, sprinkling a big pile of cocaine from a salt shaker onto the back of his hand and snorting it up. That meth was wearing off. By the time he reached Central and 21st, he was back in control, except for when he plowed into the burnt hulk of the gasoline truck. No problem. He gunned into reverse before his wheels could catch fire. Where was that damn Starbucks anyway? He found it 2 blocks farther down. Central and 23rd, that sounded familiar. Lots of police cruisers with flashing lights, too. Something must have happened here. Something bad. He needed a cup of coffee to deal with it. Inside, waiting on his caramel macchiato, a cop approached him.
"We've got one of those bikers in a booth, Detective."
"Bikers? What's this about bikers? Didn't Captain Quartz tell you?" "No, he just said something about a fight between some bikers." The cop looked confused.
"Maybe you ought to talk to this guy."
"Why? We can't kick his ass here. Let's take him downtown."
"Don't you want to ask him a couple questions first?"
"Ask who a couple of questions?" "The guy in the booth." "A good idea." They called him for his macchiato. He downed half of it in one gulp. By the time he reached the booth, he was back in control. The suspect looked like he'd been through a grinder, but tough enough to break some of its gears. He looked like he could take care of himself, maybe even handle a bizarre fictional narrative in the first person. Farrell could care less. He took out his Coke shaker, unscrewed the top, emptied its contents into his macchiato, tilted his head back, and poured the rest of the coffee up his nose.